going to be MLC specific, but a lot of it's going to apply to regardless of where you're attending. And I'll show you some examples of how we do our billing, and then just understand that it might look a little different from other schools. So at MLC, we always require 2 forms, the FAFSA and the MLC financial aid application. The MLC financial aid application is pretty much just demographic information, so it's very simple. If you are looking at other schools, you want to make sure what their deadlines are. Our deadline is always tax day. It's the same every year. Whatever tax day is, that's also when you need to get your financial aid in. We are very flexible the first year because we understand that there's a lot of transition and you might be debating between 2 schools. But after that, if you miss that deadline, you may forfeit MLC need-based aid grants. That would be free money by you missing the deadline. So deadlines are very, very important, and so it is going to be something that you want to check at each school that you're applying for. So the FAFSA is going to be available October 1st. You will be able to log in and complete all of this information. They've tried to do a very good job of streamlining the questions and making it simplified, so doing it online is the best way to do it. You'll see here, you actually are going to have to log in to do it, and I'm going to get to that screen next. So you're going to say either I'm the student or I am the parent. Do we have any parents in here that have already gone through this process with a student before? A couple, okay. So some of this is going to be a review for you. But if you're a first-time parent, one of the things that you're going to need to do, and I'm going to actually skip these screens and come back to them. You will actually need to sign up for an FSA user ID. This becomes your signature for this government website, and it will stay your signature whether you have 1 student going to college or 3 students going to college. They also, each student has their own FSA ID. That is how they sign the FAFSA. That's also how they sign for loan paperwork. So that is their signature. You can only have 1 email address for each FSA ID. So if a parent is trying to help their students set up an FSA ID, don't use your parent email address. You need to use that for your personal one. And then the student needs to have an email address that they use. This also is very important that the student knows this information because it is their signature. So again, like what Andrew was saying, it's not really to their benefit for you to just do this and then them not be involved, because they're going to have to do this every year, and they need to know that for multiple systems that the government uses in higher education. So if parents that have done this before, you keep that same FSA ID for this new student who's going to be going to college, but now they have to have their own FSA ID. Is that clear?
Just to clarify, they should not use their school email address, right?
They can, they just have to remember to go back in and change it later on. The great thing about this system is now they also tie it to your cell phone number, which they didn't used to do. So if you'd forget your password or you'd forget how to log in, you can get a code sent to your cell phone number. So the students really should link their cell phone number to their FSA ID, because then later on they can change it. Because some people don't have a personal, they just have their school one, and that's okay. But then when you get to college and you're using a different email address, you will want to update that. Great question. It is a pain in the butt if you forget your email address and you haven't linked your cell phone, because you can get caught in this loop, and it's just, as you can imagine, a government nightmare to try and break through the chains to try and figure that out. So as long as they link their cell phone and that doesn't change, they can always go back in if they forget how to log in. But if they remember their password, then it's no problem. So I'm going to go back here. So new this year, you can actually complete the FAFSA on your cell phone through an app. If that's something that seems more your style, go for it. The one caveat with that is that you cannot pull your tax information automatically if you're using the app. They're trying to work on that and get that going, but as of right now, you could get everything started, but then you wouldn't be able to pull the taxes information in. That is called the data retrieval tool. I'm going to talk about that a little later, but that is the best way for you to record your taxes, is to actually go through the IRS data retrieval tool through the FAFSA. That way then you don't have to write each number in all the different boxes. So this is kind of a new thing, so if you are a techie person, feel free to use it, but just know that there's going to be some kinks along the way. But otherwise, it will show you as things are completing. It will show you each section that's done. You will still have to sign off electronically with that FSA ID. Okay, so for next year's FAFSA, the tax information that you're using is going to be from year 2017. So they've started doing prior year, and that is so that people who do, what's that called when you have to delay your taxes? Yes, thank you. Extension. You will have all of that done theoretically, so everyone who is able to should be able to pull their taxes in. So 2017 tax information, so that's your filing status, your exemptions, everything on that tax form is all going to be from 2017. Some things, it seems kind of straightforward, but the name and social security number. This, if something gets missed, or you have a space in the first name, but then you don't do it the same, it really does need to match that social security number. For 99.9% of people, that's pretty straightforward. But when I used to work at St. Olaf College in Minnesota, we had a student who his whole life thought his name was something, but it was actually his middle name, and so when he did his FAFSA, it rejected because he was not actually using the name on his social security card. Again, not very common, but just be aware of that. The big one here to keep in mind, investments do not include retirement accounts. So they ask a lot of questions about your income, your investments, your cash and savings, but keep in mind any investment is not your retirement accounts. We get a lot of people who get that wrong, and then we have to question it. Well, we want to question it because that's it could significantly impact your financial eligibility. So keep that in mind. Again, an investment farm, I don't know how many of you farm, but that does not include a family farm that you actually live on and run. That actually impacts quite a few of our families in the Midwest. So verification, now once you put all of this data into the FAFSA, sometimes they will flag a file for verification. MLC actually does select many files as well in a certain range, because we have found that for called workers, a lot of times the housing allowance isn't being reported properly. So this just means we have to get additional documents. This is actually the cumbersome process. The actual FAFSA is pretty straightforward, but in the verification, then we would need either tax transcripts if you did not use the data retrieval tool, or you can go back into the FAFSA and pull the data in through the data retrieval tool. So when you're doing so for those of you who did a FAFSA before, did any of you use the DRT or the data retrieval tool? Yeah? Okay, so you just have to make sure that you're putting your name and address just how it was on your tax return, but otherwise then it pulls the information in and puts it right into your FAFSA. Then you don't have to change anything. The numbers are set, and then you can submit it from there. So you do have to sign this. So when you saw that initial login screen, if you log in as the parent, by the time you get to the signatures, then you have to sign it, again, with that FSA user ID and password. You can either put the email address that you used or the actual username that you created, and the student has to do the same thing. So the FAFSA really is looking at a lot of, again, the tax information. One thing that I didn't talk about with that investments is, let's say you have a cabin on a lake somewhere, that actually would be an investment that needs to get reported on the FAFSA. But sometimes there's a lot of things that happen that can't be accounted for in that information. And so you will need to check at, if you're applying to a different school, what their policy is for special circumstances. At MLC, we have a specific section on our website, and the biggest one that we have is tuition for siblings. So if you still have younger siblings here at MLS that you're paying tuition for, we want to know that so that we can help reduce that expected family contribution and hopefully give you more aid. So we have a specific form for that. That's actually right here. The school actually has to certify that amount. And it's for a calendar year. So it's for the same calendar year to match the tax year that is going to be reported on the FAFSA. So everything's on that form. We've worked with a lot of the area high schools, so they actually know about this form, and they should, if you say, hey, can you fill this out for my student, they're pretty good about just filling it out and then sending it to us. But for those of you looking at other colleges, just know that there are options for you if there are things going on that aren't reflected on your taxes. Especially because of the prior year taxes. If in 2017 you had a huge bonus because of whatever reason, but that's not a normal thing for your job, you need to let the school know, and they have ways to compensate for that to make it more accurate to what your actual situation is. So when you put all of this information in the FAFSA, it's going to record how many people are in the family, how many are in college, all of the tax information, investments, and then it comes up with this number, the expected family contribution. Now, to be 100% honest, it is not going to be accurate to what you physically are able to pay. It's going to be a much higher number than you're like, well, how are we going to pay that? Just know that it's fairly unfair, if that makes sense. So it just impacts everyone, but it's the only way that they could really think of coming up with a system that helps decide how much funding to give out to individual families, but it does not it doesn't actually accurately signify how much you physically can add to anyone's college fund. But it's going to come up with this number. So every school uses this number to figure out how much financial aid or financial need that a student or a family has. So it's going to look at the cost of attendance, and then it's going to subtract out that expected family contribution, and that's going to be the portion that they consider your need, your financial need. So on the right, you have an example. So actually, let me go to this next screen. So here's MLC's cost of attendance for this academic year. Now notice tuition, room, and board is at the top. That's $21,490. But the total cost of attendance is $26,590. So there's a big variable cost in there of $5,100. Those are going to be costs that your family might have. You'll probably have some of that, but certainly probably not the whole amount, unless your kid is flying home every other weekend to Michigan for breaks. Probably not going to happen. But every school sets that amount, what they think it costs their student for travel, personal expenses, books and supplies. So when you're figuring out, and especially if you're looking in between two schools, don't just look at the tuition, room, and board. Also look at what is in their variable costs. Sometimes, like University of Minnesota is very good at this. Their tuition actually is pretty great. But then you start looking at all of the fees that they charge, and those aren't even, you might have them, those are fees you actually will have, but they can get away with not including them in the actual tuition figure, but it's going to be in that cost of attendance figure. So you need to be looking at both things when you're looking at different schools, because it makes a big difference. Also, so the room and board is a piece of that. So room and board at other schools can be very different. Sometimes you can choose what dorm you're going to live in, and that's going to dictate what the cost is for your students. So just be very cautious when you're looking at costs of schools and know all of the numbers that you're looking at. So going back to our example here, so our cost of attendance, the full number is what we always use when figuring out financial aid. And then we subtract out, so I'm going to do an example of what an actual student's expected family contribution is, so you can see what the financial aid award looks like for that family. So based on that, their financial need is about $19,000. So if we look at the financial aid award, that's going to include the grant that they receive from MLC. This particular student lives far enough away that they get the distance grant. They also have the congregational grant, which I hear should be approved for next year. So if a congregation gives money, MLC will match up to $1,000. It's a great, great program. I hope it stays. And then that bottom was a Salem grant. So any pre-seminary students, anyone thinking of going into pre-seminary in this room? None. Okay, well, we'll work on that. No, I'm just kidding. That's totally fine. The reason I ask is because the Salem Grant is an organization that actually provides grants to all of our MLC students and our seminary students. It's an outside organization, and that's a hefty scholarship that they get, and that's renewable all 4 years at MLC and all 4 years at the seminary, which is awesome. So in this case, and then also keep in mind loans are still part of a financial aid award. That's also important to note when you are looking again at other schools. Sometimes they will add not just the federal loans, sometimes you will see a parent loan included as part of your financial aid. Sometimes they will add alternative loans. These are loans that you actually have to apply for. And so they're saying, oh, you can have, some schools will say, oh, we package up to the cost of attendance, so you won't have anything that you can't cover. But they don't tell you that $15,000 of that is an alternative loan in addition to the loan through the government. So again, you just need to be careful when you're looking at financial aid awards at other schools too. So then when the billing statement comes through, you can see the charges at the top, any pending financial aid that's going to come out, any financial aid that's been received, and then the balance due. So in this particular case, the family's already made the first payment, and so then you can see in the little corner over there what the following 3 payments would look like at that point. So you can get an idea of kind of how the breakdown is, so that you can kind of understand a little bit better, okay, so what is my bottom line going to be for how much I have to pay? So in this family's case, the amount that they physically have to pay for tuition, room, and board is $7,600. So it's still, that's a lot of money, but it can be manageable depending on how you approach it. With a part-time job during school, that's a reality for a lot of our students. A lot of students work about 20 hours a week. So that's one way. Hopefully the summers before you go to school, you need to be working as much as you can, because that's a great time to hopefully maximize some earning potential. There's also a 10-month payment plan, so that breaks it up even further. So I'm going to give you an example of that. Well, here's another one of a 4-payment plan. So this particular student had $16,567 in financial aid. Actually $17,000 because of the congregational grant. So this student actually received Pell Grant. They also received the Witness Scholarship. So our merit-based scholarships are in addition to any need-based aid that you would qualify for. So we don't say, oh, they get a merit scholarship and then reduce your grant. We figure out your grant eligibility first and then award the merit scholarships on top of that. Hopefully that makes sense. So a great incentive for you to keep your grades up, because free money is always a good thing. And then, so this is an example of the 10 monthly payment plan. So it breaks it up a little bit more because you're having 10 payments. So this family only received $12,000 in financial aid. and that included the Pell Grant again, and that Messenger Scholarship, so that's the $2,000 academic scholarship. So their overall balance was $9,500, but they are able to break it up into 10 $964 payments. Still a lot of money, but sometimes that's enough of a breathing room to make it work. So it just kind of depends on the family and the situation and the financial aid. So we talked about scholarships. This is a chart that shows you what our merit-based scholarships are. For ours at MLC, you don't actually have to apply. There's no separate application. We review all of the transcripts coming in, and we will award this to anyone who's eligible. If you're applying to other schools and you want to check out their merit scholarships, they might have a separate application, so make sure you're checking into that. Sometimes they have multiple things that you have to apply for, not just their standard financial aid. So if you notice, for national merit, that's the biggest. That's going to be $4,000, and that is renewable as long as while they're at MLC. That's the column on the far right. That's the GPA that they need to have at MLC. If you look under the actual title, like the Messenger, in high school you need to have a GPA of 3.75 or higher, or an ACT score of 30 or higher. If not, then you can look at the Witness Scholarship. So that range is 3.5 to 3.74. And then the ACT range is 27 to 29. The other thing that's important to note is maybe this isn't something like, oh, I had a bad junior year, or I had a bad sophomore year, my GPA isn't that high. Just know that you get a clean slate when you start at college. So your GPA starts over. It is a great opportunity for you students to really hit the books your freshman year, because even at other schools they may have merit scholarships for returning students. So these are scholarships that you can get as returning students as well. It's not just a one-time chance and then you're done. We look at this every year for our students. The Ministry Scholarship is actually another great opportunity for you to work with your faculty members on your campus, because they vote for students to receive this. And we give out about, I want to say about 60 or 70 ministry scholarships a year. So that's another opportunity to, maybe your grades aren't quite a 3.25 at MLC, but you really know your professors well and you're a very eager student. Well, chances are then you might get that ministry scholarship. We have a page on our website for additional scholarships. These would be specific to MLC students. So these are donors have provided different funds, and there's different qualifications for some of these, and those are happening throughout the year. I think right now on our website, if you looked, I think there's 5 posted. So that's in addition to whatever financial aid that you already have. So throughout the year, there's also additional opportunities for scholarship funding. There's also a section for you to use like a scholarship search. How many of you students have ever used a scholarship search? Couple? It's time consuming, it can be frustrating, but do know that there is free money out there. There's a lot of organizations that have a lot of different scholarships. And it's another thing that don't just do it one year. Try and do it as many times as you can, because you're just opening up your chances for additional funding for school. And I really like to have people look first in their community, like whether it be maybe where you're working for the summer, maybe they have scholarships, or your local VFW or something like that. Start smaller and then broaden your search a little bit to help yourself. We also have student employment listing. As I said, a lot of our students do work part-time. Actually, studies have shown that students who work at least some part-time hours are better at time management while in school than those who aren't. But sometimes you have to know yourself too. Maybe it's more important for you to focus on your academics, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you can do both, that's even better. But we have on-campus and off-campus opportunities. Some people are worried, well, my student's not bringing a car to New Ulm. There's a lot right in that area. We have a lot of tutoring at the grade school, just right down the hill, and there's lots of campus jobs as well. So most of the time, if your student wants to be working, they can be. All right, so that brings us to loans. Oh, this is the big sigh part. So odds are that all of you will probably need some kind of loan help, at least a little bit along the way. So the guide is the general rule: don't borrow more than your first year's gross earnings. So does anyone have any idea what a first-year teacher this year happens to make? Any guesses? Here's some whispering, but no one's brave enough to yell out a number. Okay, that's all right, I'll just tell you. $29,290 is the base salary. Now that does not include housing allowance. So housing allowance is probably $3,000 to $4,000 more depending on where they live. So it sounds, sometimes people are like, oh, that's terrible, and other people are like, whoa, that's a lot of money. So I mean, perspective is a funny thing when it comes to money. But just know that some of your first year teachers make more than I do. So when you put that in perspective, that's an okay wage then, right? So we really don't want students to borrow more than that $29,000 if possible. Now, there's a lot of families that they have no other option. This is what their student really wants to do, and they're super passionate about it. Well, you know, the Lord will help you where He can, but you also can't be a stick in the mud, so you got to try and earn some money too to help with your schooling. So every year there are maximums that the government sets for how much you can borrow in a year. So freshmen, the maximum a freshman can even take out is $5,500. And this isn't a federal loan. There are other loans in addition to this if you would need that, but we really want you to just kind of focus on the federal loans because they have more flexible repayment and their interest rate is generally much lower. So you can see here the maximum each year. If they would go for 4 years, so they're a single major, they would end with $27,000. This becomes a little bit tricky for our double majors who are there for 5 years because that 5th year, they only have $4,000 eligibility before they reach the cumulative total that you can take out. Now, the one thing with this is that the government is talking about making a lot of changes to Higher Education Act. That could change what this looks like. I don't know, but for right now, this is what it's been for decades. So we're just gonna go with that until they tell us otherwise. But it really does mean that you need to kind of manage where you think you can make payments. So what does that look like when you're borrowing that much money? Let me go back one moment. So the middle column there is subsidized. So if you qualify based on your need for a subsidized loan, that means the government is going to pay the interest while you are in school. So that is the first type of loan that you want to borrow if you have to borrow a loan, is a subsidized loan, because it's not going to have any interest while you're in school. So this here, this breakdown shows you what the repayment would look like if you took just the subsidized loan or if you had to take the maximum amount. So $243 versus $328. The other thing that will keep this number lower is if your student can be making payments on the interest while they are in school. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. So it really depends again on the situation. But this is doable on a teacher's salary. But if you have to do this, and now you have a student alternative loan in addition to that, that gets very, very challenging. Okay, so kind of to put this all together, biggest thing to remember is meet the deadlines for financial aid. Know what it is for the schools that you're applying to. Apply for scholarships and save as much money as you can over the summer, during the school year, odd and end jobs, whatever you can, because any money that you're able to pay up front is going to save you years if you would have to take that out in a loan. And then only take out what you absolutely need. All right, so I mentioned that I'm the financial literacy coordinator at our school, so I want to give you a little bit of a little glimpse into what that looks like on our campus.
There are 3 main types of requirements for the MLC Direction Financial Literacy Program. Each year, students will have 3 to 4 online activities to complete through Cash Course. Individual meetings are required for students new to MLC, focusing on loan details and responsible borrowing, and required for graduating students, reviewing the transition to life after college and creating a personalized budget. Group sessions are currently only required for first-year students and juniors. Students log into Portal and select Financial Literacy under the Grades tab. They can track all of their requirements here. The online activities through Cash Course can be completed anytime during the academic year and take about 20 minutes to complete. Group sessions will only be listed for first-year students and juniors. Students will be emailed to set up their financial review meeting if one is required. Once any of the requirements are done, the status will change to complete. We have special events in April to celebrate Financial Literacy Month. Students have opportunities to win prizes for participating. Any student can contact the Financial Literacy Coordinator to set up an appointment, even if one is not required. Additional resources are available on the MLC Direction website. We also have a Facebook page that lists helpful articles and scholarship opportunities, both on campus at MLC specifically and through other organizations in the community.
So that was our theme from last year. This year it's Financial Survivor. So if you're a Survivor fan, I'm going to be Jeff Probst. I'm kind of excited. So we try to make financial education fun. So for those of you who will be coming to MLC, you will get a meeting with me one-on-one, and it's awesome. And we go over loans and just life sometimes. But we really want to help students make sure that they're not just managing their financial aid, but also, you know, even just a bank account. What does that look like? So those are the kind of topics that we do. And then for graduating students, we actually put together a budget based on what their estimated income will be as a called worker and what their loan payments are going to be, so that you have a better idea of what to expect when you're going to be leaving and being on your own for the first time. So that's what I have. Yes?
One of the ways that I've heard reducing costs for college would be to go to like community college for the first couple of years. I know that MLC has a fairly specific class list. How does that, is that advisable, and how does that work?
If you ask me, absolutely save money. But you would really want to work with the deans there to make sure you know, or even the admissions counselor, what classes will transfer, which classes won't, because you don't want to spend time doing that if you're going to just have to add years. Yep, but I mean, I don't know what the official stance is, but I am a huge fan of doing that and getting some of your generals out of the way. Yep, but they are very specific. So if you're working with the admissions office, they're really good at helping you kind of map that out. Great question. And we're hopefully going to have some time at the end. And Greg has an awesome presentation, and it's going to fill in a lot of the gaps that I didn't cover. This was kind of like the first full circle. Okay. Okay. Okay, so here's that.
Does anyone use a 529 savings account? Okay. Does anyone know that 529s can now be used for private schools K through 12? Oh, there you go. That's a change that just happened because of the new tax law. Greg's very good about all the laws. I'm a member of Christ and Shields, and one of the members there owns his own tax business, and he was telling me how 1 year alone there were over 10,000 new tax laws. I said, this is why I pay someone to do my taxes. I can't keep up with that. Yep.
Did Michigan adopt that? Because a few months ago they had not.
Greg can probably...
Yeah, you can use up to $10,000 a year for parochial school in Michigan.
I'm not
You got it.
exactly sure what we did wrong. Maybe messed it up, Greg.
Get an IT specialist.
If you want to stand up for a moment, stretch your legs while I get his opened up for you. Update knowledge. This one is yours. I think that one is yours. Open up.
It's a slideshow. And then from the beginning.
There we go.
There we go. It's working now.
Me.
Over.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much. That's very good.
Awesome, Joel. Is this thing on still?
It's over. You know, I didn't know if it was or not.
Sorry, it's November 12th on Monday.
I mean, I could hear you fine. I don't, but this isn't coming.
Oh, I feel like I can hear it.
I'll just talk loud.
Joellen mentioned, because you see it, Joellen mentioned, check your local area for various scholarships. Senior parents and seniors, you should have received the first register random from me. There is a list on there of some scholarships in the area. I'll keep adding more of those on there. However, Monday, November 12th, the seniors already aren't happy with me because I told them this, but Monday, November 12th is a meeting mini here, which means we as a faculty kind of have a morning in service. Usually the students don't start until 9 o'clock. However, that day, Ms. Heather Crowell, who works for the Midland Foundation for their scholarships, she's coming in to teach the seniors how to write scholarships and some various things to look at. So, November 12th, that's a Monday. You guys will be attending at 7:50. Again, if you have any questions about financial aid, college things, please ask on that email that I sent out. I've sent stuff to Joellen before, to Mark Bauer at MLC, things like that. Feel free to ask the questions. Most people are probably asking, and I'll get you a response to them.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Everybody glazed over yet? Does everybody have one of these packets? I don't know if I brought enough for everybody or not. If not, I told Andrew I would get some more dropped off. A lot of the stuff that's geared in here is geared for parents of seniors, but even if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, good information. A lot of the stuff that Joellen went over is going to stay the same year over year. Scholarship stuff we'll talk about. So if anyone needs one of these, I don't know if we ran out on the back table or not, but I'll make sure that we get some more over to Andrew. Inside the packet, I'm not going to walk through all this, but there's a lot of the information that Joellen went through that we're going to go through. When you hear this for the first time, I know I'm the parent of 3. I've got 2 kids in college. My youngest is a junior in high school. I'm a financial advisor in Bay City. I head up our college planning wing. I deal with this stuff every single day and have for years, but as a parent, if we're hearing this for the first time tonight, after about 10 minutes, it's like, said something about a website and something about a FAFSA and an EFC, and it's a lot for us to take in. So a lot of the information we're going to cover is in here. It re-explains the financial aid process. We're going to talk about some important dates, deadlines, scholarship links. Joellen mentioned, start looking now. Parents of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, most of the seniors, when they get their financial aid package here in March, April, we sit down as parents starting to figure out and say, okay, I did everything that Joellen said and Greg said, and we got the financial aid package, and it now says I need to come up with $12,000. You know, we've saved some money through the years, but where are we going to come up with that? A lot of families will come into our office wanting to look for scholarships. At that time, it's too late. So get the kids looking early. Here locally, local foundations, the Saginaw Foundation, saginawfoundation.org. That's in your handouts here. You don't have to write this down. Bay Foundation, our own charitable foundation. I don't know if anyone here locally has ever heard of the Just for Kids Foundation, but in our office we have our own charitable foundation. We give away about $50,000 a year to local graduates, Bay, Saginaw, Midland County. This year's application is in this handout for seniors. Minimum GPA 2.0 or higher, so you don't have to have a 4.0 to be eligible. Okay. There's also a calendar of events in here, month by month, what parents or what seniors should be doing from now through the course of the year right on off till fall. So that's what's in the packets. Again, my background's financial planning. I deal with this, again, as a parent with 2 in college and 1 going off to school. We specialize kind of in late stage college planning. As a financial advisor, it's easy for me to sit down with a parent of a newborn and mathematically calculate and tell them how much money they have to start saving for 18 years to have enough money to cover school, right? But then we all know that life happens. In my house with my daughter, it was dance. My son, it was hockey. It's braces, it's cars, there's just too many things tugging at your paycheck every Friday. So for us to say, go put away, $800 a month for the next 18 years and you're gonna have all this money, that doesn't normally happen. So then 18 years kind of cruise by, and then now we're here getting ready to send the kids off to school. So a lot of what we do is what we call late stage college funding. It's for parents of seniors, kids going off now saying we've saved or we haven't. How do we get as much aid as we possibly can, and then how are we gonna cover the balance? And by the way, we wanna make sure mom and dad can still retire. Okay, so I'm going to go through, Joellen did an awesome job going through the process, the calculations. I've got some slides, not that many, I promise. I'm not going to keep you here 4 hours. But to go through some things kind of high level, and then what I'd like to do is open it up to questions. If you guys have any kind of questions at all regarding FAFSA, what has to go on it, loans, any of that information at all, feel free to fire away. And as we're going through here, feel free to ask questions, okay? What's college planning? To me, the financial aid process is part of that. And as parents, we're sitting here as students saying, okay, what form do I fill out and where do I get the money? But there's a lot that goes into that. Financial aid's a part of that. Joellen mentioned some important dates and deadlines. There's a couple that I want to make sure that you're aware of. So in my office, our clients, parents of seniors, I want their FAFSAs filed the month of October. Depending on where the kids go off to school, a lot of aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis. So if the floodgates are going to open at the financial aid office and they're going to start processing financial aid packages, I want your students to be the first in line, not rolling in the door in February, March, April, May next year if they may have missed something. The federal application deadline, not deadline, the soonest we can apply is October 1st, as Joellen mentioned. State of Michigan, if you have any students going off to school in the state of Michigan, priority filing deadline, March 1st. So if somebody waited to get their taxes done, or which again, we're going to have tax returns from 2017, but if we're making updates, I want to make sure that if you have a student going to school in the state of Michigan someplace, that, again, make sure you get your FAFSAs filed in October. We don't have to worry about missing any dates or deadlines, okay? Application or taxes and tax planning, I'm not an accountant nor a CPA, but I'm going to kind of touch on those high level as well, that if you do your own taxes, there's some education credits I want to make sure you're aware of. If you have a tax advisor, a CPA that you work with, I want to make sure that you remind them that you have kids in school. Every year I bump into folks who have maybe been filing returns and just missed some tax credits, where they may have missed a few $1,000s in education credits. So we'll talk about that. Admissions, finding the right school, selecting the right school, both based on size, cost, and curriculum. Lots of times we'll have students coming to our office and maybe they're going to go off to Michigan State. And it's like, why do you want to go off to Michigan State? Well, their room's been green and white. And they've been to every football game, every basketball game for years. The family's a big Michigan State fan. But if they have not sat through class, not been on campus, that can be overwhelming. There's 50,000 students down there. So a lot of students we see are changing schools just because once they get on campus, it's too big, too small, what have you. Trying to narrow that search down is helpful. So get out and start visiting schools, parents of seniors and juniors. It's not too early to be doing that now. Seniors should be doing that already. Schedule visits, and I always say schedule something beyond just the campus tour. Go sit through a class. Go meet with a professor. Get a feel for what that campus is going to be like. A lot of these schools will allow the students to do that. They may allow them to spend the night on campus. Again, some kids may thrive in a big campus setting or small, but kind of helping narrow down that search. I know when my daughter went off to school, gosh, years ago, I was excited to do that with her because I've done this for years with other children. She was my first, and I think she dreaded it after the first 3 or 4 visits because I had meetings signed up with all the professors to go through, not just the financial aid office, that much I know about, but I wanted her to get a good feel for each campus. And we picked up more out of meetings with the professors one-on-one than we did just the general orientation or the visit. So where they're not trying to sell you on the school, sell you on the campus, but trying to help the kids really figure out, is this what you're wanting to do, can be helpful. Forms, there's lots of them. Funding strategies and solutions as parents and students, we all want to know how the heck we're going to pay for this expense. For most of us, it'll be the largest expense, beyond our home. So affordability is important. Everyone here's got a clean slate. So I could keep you guys here for hours giving you stories about families and students that I've met with, where they'll come into our office and say, gosh, can you help us out? My son or daughter's graduated. They've got all these loans. We're not sure how much they owe. We're not sure how they're going to pay them back. How they expect them to pay them back. They're not even working yet. They're not even sure how much they owe. So There's not a reason in the world kids can't go off to school today. I've had parents come and tell me we can't afford it. I don't buy it. Send somebody into my office, I will find a way for them to go to school without breaking the bank. But you want to make smart decisions day one. So lots of times I'll have families say, we're just going to go borrow. Johnny or Susie's just going to go take student loans. And there are limits, as Joel mentioned, as to how much they can borrow. And I see far too many students graduating from college and coming up with student loan debt that's the equivalent of a 30-year mortgage. So we can make some choices ahead of time. We can cut that cost down. Earlier there was a question about starting out at a local community school. That can be an awesome strategy for families. There's a lot of these schools have what are called transfer articulation programs. They are geared to start locally and transfer on to another school. And as Joe Allen mentioned, you can sit down with admissions. They will map that out with you. So here locally, I'll give you an example. We've got 2 good schools right here in our backyard with Delta College and Saginaw Valley right down the road. Okay? If we've got students wanting to go off to let's say, Northwood University in Midland to pursue accounting or business, Northwood's running right now a little over 40 grand a year. That's for one academic year. They have a program through Delta, either 2+2 or 3+1 program, where the student can be at Delta for 2 years, transfer over to Northwood for 2 years, come away with the identical diploma, but it may have saved them north of 80 grand in the process. That's real money. Okay, so a lot of these schools do have good working arrangements with other schools, and they will map out which classes will transfer that. You want to be talking to admissions at both ends. In retirement planning, for most of us as parents, it's how do we get the kids through school, but make sure that there are no retirement loans. So we'll talk about student loans, and in the schools we'll find easy ways for us as parents to pay the bill, but they're not the ones paying it, that's us. They just want to make sure that they get paid at their end. But when the kids are done, we want to know how much am I going to be on the hook for, and or the kids. We want to have those discussions ahead of time. Okay? This is just to give you kind of a snapshot. The cost of school, private versus state, and this slide's actually about, those numbers are a couple of years old, but a private school here locally, if you start looking at a Elma, Albion, Hope, Hillsdale, Northwood type school very quickly, they're going to run up to about 40 grand a year for one academic year. Okay, most of the state schools in the state of Michigan, we're looking about 20 grand a year for one academic year. Earlier I mentioned do not rule out a school based on cost. If your son or daughter wants to go to Harvard, MIT, Yale, and it's 50, 60, 70, 80 grand a year, and you're thinking, well, I saved $8, don't assume today that that's not possible. Okay, in many cases, we've got students going off to schools that are more expensive and coming away with less debt than they would here locally. So early on, do not rule out a school based on sticker price alone. Okay? There may come a time where after you've looked at all the aid and all the options and scholarships that it gets ruled out, but early on, a lot of the more expensive schools have a lot more money to give out. So in many cases, a $40,000 or $50,000 or $60,000 a year school may not cost any more than a $15,000 or $20,000 a year school. The middle bullet point are applying the number of kids. In your household, lots of times I will meet with families and they'll say, gosh, my son or daughter's going off to school next year. We've saved some money through the years. We got money from open house for graduation, but we're going to need to come up with an additional 10 grand. Where do I come up with that 10 grand? Which loan should I go use? They're just kind of hyper-focused on that 10 grand. Well, if you've got 2 kids in your household, and let's assume that they're 4 years apart, we don't need 10,000 if they're both going to be in school for 4 years. If it's 10 grand a year, we're going to need 80, right? So, I mean, that's going to continue to come back year after year after year. So begin to look in your family situation, how many kids that you have, where you think they're going to go off to school, and look at and have kind of a big picture game plan. That may change or alter how you pay for your first year school. In some cases, rather than using student loans year by year, and this is not a recommendation, but you know, if I've got a family where they've got income stable and they're okay financially, and if we know we need to come up with 80 grand over the next 8 years per se, then gosh, we may go look at what are the interest rate options we have. Some of the federal loans, the interest rates continue to creep up. You know, are they a good candidate to go use home equity? Could they borrow money 2 years ago at 2 or 3% fixed? Put that money away safe and use that to fund school for the next 8 years. There are options out there that may fit. So look at things kind of big picture, not year by year. This is kind of a snapshot because a lot of people ask me about different schools here in the state of Michigan. This is just to give you kind of a ballpark idea what some of the schools in the state, what tuition is at, and this is based on 2017 numbers. So to give you kind of a ballpark up at the top, Michigan Tech and U of M, about 15 grand a year. Saginaw Valley, again, we're fortunate, we got a great school here locally. They got the lowest cost tuition for a 4-year in state university, 10 grand a year. That's tuition only. So if the kids are going to live on campus, basically take all those numbers and double them. So if you got a student that's going off to Michigan, you're looking at 30 grand a year, not 14 or 15. Okay? How are we going to pay for all that? Statistically, about 4 in 10 have saved money specifically labeled kids' college education. That's money that's in 529 plans, savings bonds, cash in the bank, coffee can under the bed. Any idea what the average is that families have saved nationally? So this isn't our robbing money from retirement or our other investments. This is money as parents that we said, that's college money, that's college money. About 10 grand. So if you think your neighbor, your coworker, everyone's just sitting home writing checks, the vast majority are not, okay? Go look at the cost of tuition at Saginaw Valley 1 year, that's 1 year at Saginaw Valley. So most folks are not, and I've been doing this a long time, not many folks are just sitting there writing checks and saying, Greg, who do I write the check out to for 30 grand this year? And so most have not saved enough, which leads us to number 2, which is to borrow. I don't want mom, dad, or student to borrow a penny more than they absolutely positively have to. Okay, but if we're going to have to borrow, we want to do it the most efficient way we can, and we're going to want to make sure that we borrow as much as we can in the students' names first. And the reason for that, and Joelle mentioned earlier, through the federal loans, they're always going to get better rates, terms, and conditions than we as parents will. So this year, they're going to let the kids go borrow, take out student loans at 5% as parents. They're going to charge us almost 8%. Okay, so go look for the most cost-effective option. So myths versus reality. If you get nothing else out of the financial aid process, do me a favor, make sure every single year that you have kids in college that you're filling out the FAFSA. I've ran into so many people throughout the years that said, nope, we did that a year or 2 ago, we quit. We make too much money. We received the award letter. They said, we're not going to waste our time. Okay. We've got clients in our office with household income north of $200,000 a year with their students receiving some form of need-based aid. There's a whole lot that goes into the calculation. So Joellen went through the calculation, said what's the cost of attendance and what's mom and dad's family contribution, and then there's need or there's not, and that's processed. And so a lot of families, if I've got a client where their son or daughter is going off to Delta College, their cost of attendance for financial aid purposes is about 10 grand a year. Okay, it doesn't cost 10 grand a year to go to Delta, it's roughly closer to 5. But for financial aid purposes, they allow for transportation, housing, that type of thing. So it's about 10 grand a year. Well, if we've got household income north of 60 grand a year in the household, that student likely is not going to see any need-based financial aid at Delta College. So then year 2, that family may not be real motivated to go through and fill out this FAFSA process again. Okay? Let's say year 3, though, that student left Delta College and transferred off to Central Michigan University. And by the way, now we've got another student that just started as well. Now we've got 2 kids in college. The formula's just changed drastically. Maybe down the road, I've got one client that had 6 kids. They had them in for 17 consecutive years. They had years where they had 4 and 5 kids in college at once. The formulas change drastically. The application process is free. Make sure you do it every single year that you have kids in school, whether you receive need-based aid or not. Okay. Owning a home doesn't matter. Aid's only for special groups. It's not. It's an easy process. It's a government form application process. There's lots to it. School people can help. School people can be a great resource. Work closely with the counselor's office here. Work closely with the counselor's office, the financial aid office, admissions office at the schools you're going off to. If you have advisors you work with, you got a financial advisor, an accountant, a CPA, make sure you're talking to all these folks to help make sure that you're not missing anything along the way. Okay? Apply to multiple schools. Again, if your son or daughter already knows where they want to go off to school, great. If they're not sure, I typically suggest to students to apply to probably 5 or 6 schools. Have their dream school, so if they want to go off to a school that's highly selective, what if they don't get in? And if that's the only school that they've applied to and they find out, hey, they've been waitlisted and by the way, they didn't get accepted, you don't want to be scrambling late winter looking at other schools. In some schools, to be considered for financial aid, they have to fill out the FAFSA. And then what you want your son or daughter to have is multiple financial aid offers or award letters. So different offers. So it's possible that school A may offer your son or daughter more money than school B. If your son or daughter really wants to go to another school, they may be able to use that financial aid offer as leverage. A lot of the schools are going to compete for students that are doing well. They're wanting their graduation rates to be high. If they know they're going to do well, get involved on campus, have more than one offer to pick from. And ultimately, you're not going to know what the cost of school is going to be unless they've applied to those schools. So you need multiple financial aid offers to know what the true the true cost will be. Have a backup plan if a school's not accepted or if it is cost prohibitive. Again, earlier I said don't rule out a school based on sticker price. But if we found out and said, okay, yep, my son or daughter wanted to go off to Michigan or wanted to go off to Northwood and it's going to cost us 150 or 60 grand, then maybe a better option is going to Delta for 2 years, transferring over and cutting the cost in half. So have a backup plan. Begin with the end in mind, meaning what's the total cost going to be? I see, again, a lot of students and parents just saying, how do I cover that bill? It's due in August, and I need 6 grand, I need 12 grand, I need 19,000, whatever that number happens to be. Sit down and have a discussion with your son or daughter. Who's going to be involved or responsible to pay for this expense? So if mom and dad's going to help, or we're going to have help from grandpa and grandma, we've got other assets to help, great. If the kids are going to be on the hook for some of it, all of it, none of it, have those discussions day one, not when they're done as seniors. How do we apply for financial aid? Joellen talked about the FAFSA. There are some schools that may require what's called a CSS profile. University of Michigan, for example. So if anyone's considering going to University of Michigan, there's an additional application that has to be submitted before your son or daughter will be considered for need-based aid. That application is not free. That one can be submitted as soon as October 1st. It's going to ask a lot of the same questions as the FAFSA, but it's going to get into more detail. If you're not sure, any schools that you guys are looking at, make sure you contact them and ask them beyond the FAFSA form, what other forms, if any, are going to be required for my son or daughter to be considered for financial aid. You don't want to miss a deadline just because we didn't submit an application. Student loans. Joellen talked about the different loan limits. And again, lots of us as parents just think, well, the kids are going to go take out loans, they'll borrow what they need. They can't borrow 100% of what they need, as Joellen mentioned. As a freshman, it's $5,500 a year, sophomore, $6,500, junior and senior, $7,500 a year. People always ask me what the interest rates are. These are the rates, they update them every July 1st. These are the rates this year. So 5.05 for students. If you drop all the way down to the bottom one where it says direct plus loan, that's a parent loan, it's 7.6%. So if my son or daughter is going off to school and they need another $10,000, if I go take that out of my name, I can do that as a parent through the federal student loan process. I don't have to make a payment, but the minute that money is dispersed to the school, it's going to start accruing interest at 7.6%. I don't have to pay on it while they're in school, but that interest is continuing to compound. Each year, the loan limits will go up. Think about when you're going to use these loans. Lots of times I will see families of freshmen going off to college not take out a student loan year one. They've saved some money in their 529 plan. They got savings bonds. They had an open house. They didn't need to borrow, and I don't want them to borrow a penny more than they have to. But think about year 2, 3, and 4. If you're going to have enough money to cover those other years, then don't take out a student loan year one. If we know that in year 2 you're not going to have enough, or in year 3 we're going to be $10,000 or $15,000 short, you may not want your son or daughter to turn their back to that loan year one. So for example, I'll use Delta College as an example. A lot of students going off here locally don't take out a student loan going off to Delta their first year. The costs are usually fairly manageable. It's $4,000 to $5,000 in expense. Mom and dad or kids have saved some money. Through the years, they can go cover that. If they plan on being at Delta for 2 years, then transferring off to Northwood, let's say, or to CMU or to Michigan State for years 3 and 4, when they're a junior or senior, they can borrow $7,500 a year at those other schools, right? If we still need another 10 grand, there's other loans we can look at, but they're going to be at less favorable rates. So we may have to go take out a Parent Plus loan or use some kind of alternative loan. So if we know in later years we're not going to have enough to cover years 2, 3, and 4, the kids may want to take advantage of that loan year one, even if they don't need it. That'll help our savings go that much further, and then hopefully they won't have to borrow as much through less favorable loans. Parent Plus loan, we talked about that. If my son or daughter needed additional money, 10 grand, the school will make it very easy for me to come up with that 10 grand through using what's called a Parent Plus loan. That loan I am on the hook for. So the kids taking out loans in their names, we as parents do not go on them as co-signers. That's a loan in their name alone. We have zero responsibility. If my son or daughter needs an extra 10 grand and I take out a Parent Plus loan, that's a loan in my name. That loan through the federal loan system can never be consolidated with my son or daughters. So sometimes I'll hear parents say, well, we're going to go take that, but they're going to go pay them. I'm on the hook for that loan until it's paid in full. Only way I'm not going to be out of it is pay it off in full, or something were to happen to me and I were to die, it's forgiven at that point in time. But I can never pass that loan off to my son or daughter through federal loan consolidation. So, and again, typically they're going to be at higher rates. We can borrow typical repayment periods up to 10 years. If you owe 30 grand or more, you can stretch that out to 25 years. But as parents getting closer to retirement, I don't want them amassing a big loan to refinance or to take out for that many years. How do we take out a loan actually? So Joellen talked about the FSA ID. Important to have, you need to have that set up, number one. Number two, you have to file a FAFSA form. So if your son or daughter wants to take out a federal direct loan, they have to file a FAFSA to do that, okay? Once the school puts together a financial aid package, they'll make available the various loans. The students are going to have to log on and complete what's called a master promissory note. That's a fancy name for loan application. It can be done online. Studentloans.gov, or most of the schools will have links to it on their website. They're also going to have to complete what's called entrance loan counseling. That process is going to go through and explain to the kids that these are loans, they're going to have to pay them back. They'll explain the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans. They'll begin to go through budgeting to get the kids thinking about what's the repayment going to be. They should typically only have to do that one time, unless they transfer schools. They may be required to recomplete that. But as a freshman, they complete a master promissory note, they complete entrance loan counseling, they stay at the same school, they won't do it again until they graduate.
I want to just interrupt one moment. Actually, it just passed the Senate, or the House, one of them, that they are going to require it every year, but it's not official yet. It has to go through both the House or the Senate, so I'm not sure which one passed it.
Gotcha.
So it's very likely that the entrance counseling will be due every year.
Could be then.
And that would be a change from previous, so.
Gotcha.
Just FYI.
Yep. Awesome. And the schools may have some additional forms. Delta College, for example. So if they put together and the school makes a loan available, they have to go, they have a student loan request form that they have to submit in. They have their own form of Delta College to submit, and then they still have to go do those two other steps. So just know that wherever the kids are going off to school, check with the financial aid office to verify is there any additional forms that they have to do beyond the steps that are outlined there. These are in your packets too, in your handouts. What if we need additional money? So this happens quite often. So son or daughter's received, you know, they're at a school that's 20 or 30 grand a year. They're getting 15,000 in grants, scholarships, loans, but now we're still 15 grand short. We as parents can go use the Parent Plus loan. Maybe in some cases parents will say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going on the loan. That's up to my son or daughter to pay that. Now we can look at what's called alternative private student loans. There's lots of them out there. Okay, you will get bombarded with information the minute you have kids in school. Be very, very careful. These, in my opinion, are going to be the last loans that you'd ever want to have to use. Because they're going to typically have, I mean, now some of them are coming out with fixed rates, but the interest rates are going to be typically higher than what the federal loans are. They're not going to have the flexibility. I've ran into several families throughout the years where they've been using these day one where they never used the federal loans. Again, always use the federal loans first for the students. If you are going to go and we need to go borrow additional funding, you can go look at like a Sallie Mae Smart Option loan, or there's lots of different loans. Your banks or your credit unions will all have these. Start asking questions about cost and fees. Number one, fixed versus variable rates. I'm not an economist, but we've seen interest rates tick up here quite a bit in the last 2-3 years, and I've got a feeling they may continue. So you want to be real careful as far as what type of rate you pick. Repayment, deferment options, release of cosigner options. Most of these alternative private student loans, if you got a student that needs to go borrow another 10 grand, these kids aren't working, so they're going to want a parent to go on and cosign. Some of these alternative loans will never release the cosigner. Some will let the cosigner apply to be released after 1 or 2 years of consecutive on-time payments. So I would look for one that's going to let us off as soon as possible. Credit unions, check with them. Home equity loans, again, in some cases can be a viable option. You know, so if you said, gosh, I know I need 10 grand and we're not going to need a large amount, it's possible you may be able to go borrow home equity at a lower fixed rate. Give you a more competitive return. 401k and 403bs, be careful of that. It is true that you can go into your 401k or retirement savings plan and go borrow money, and it's not taxable, but then you're going to pay it back with after-tax money, and you're actually going to get taxed on it twice. Meaning that if I went and borrowed 10 grand from my 401k plan to go pay the tuition bill, I can go do that, but I'm going to pay that loan back over 5 years is typically the longest we can pay that back, and you have to pay it back with after-tax money, and then when you pull it out in retirement, you're going to get taxed on it again. So. A lot of schools, and Joellen touched on, can be an awesome option. Look for payment plans. A lot of the schools will have zero interest payment plans. So if you get it set up and you can budget that and it works from a cash flow standpoint, if you owe the school an extra $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 and you can do that through payments through the course of the year, that can be one of your best options, especially if there's no interest rate attached to it. Locally, residents of Saginaw County, I'm not a fan of alternative private student loans, but this is a good one to look at. So if your son or daughter is going off to school, we're going to need some additional funding, use the federal loans first. And I don't think this is in your handouts, but if you maybe want to look at, it's called a CKED loan. It's a loan locally. You have to be a resident of Saginaw County. It's administered through Huntington Bank. The interest rate to the kids while they're in school is 3% fixed. When they graduate, it's 5% fixed. So there's caps as to how much that they can borrow. Depending on the school that they're at, it's going to be $3,500 to $4,500 a year roughly. So that can be a great supplement if we do need a few extra $1,000 to look at before someone. That would be the first one I would look at for anyone that's in Saginaw County. This I just want to touch on briefly. Joellen talked about the FAFSA and what has to go on there. It's very important to know what accounts go where on that FAFSA application. In your handouts, I actually had given you guys a copy of the 2017-2018 FAFSA. And what that is, again, it's the government application. We're filling that, providing all that information. They're using that to determine what our ability to pay for school is the following year for a son or daughter. Okay? Problem is if we make a mistake entering data, chances are we're not going to know, the financial aid office may not know, they're going to process our financial aid package based on the data we put on that form. Okay? So lots of times I will get questions, or I'll go through as to what accounts have to go on there and who are they filed underneath. Savings bonds, for example, if you have savings bonds for your children, they do go on there, but make sure you look at the actual value, not what the face value is. So my parents bought my kids savings bonds. If they went and bought them a $100 savings bond, they actually paid $50 for it, not $100. That's what it'll mature to. So if that bond's only worth $62, I don't want to assume it's worth $100. Any assets that the kids have inside these calculations are assessed at 20% inside the financial aid formulas. Okay? Any assets that we have parents have are assessed at 5.64% in the formulas. Those are numbers that are used to determine this family contribution. What we want to be able to do is legally and ethically keep our family contribution as low as possible, and we want to make sure we don't include accounts that don't have to go on there. So if I got savings bonds, they're going to go on there, but you can go to treasurydirect.gov's website. You can enter them to look up the actual value of them. And if it's on there with my name and my daughter's name and it's under my social security number, I'm going to list that under me as the parent. That way it may not be assessed at all, or if it is, it's going to be assessed at a much lower rate than under my daughter. If I have custodial accounts, if your son or daughter, or if you've set up, or someone set up for your kids what's called a UTMA or UGMA account, those are student-owned assets. So if I've got $10,000 in a custodial account, that has to go under my son or daughter's assets, and they're assessed at 20% inside the formulas. So that 10 grand would potentially may cost them $2 grand in financial aid. Those are listed under them. If it's an education-based account, so if it is a 529 plan, a covered LIRA, those are listed under us as parents. So easy, it may not seem like a big deal, but if I thought, gosh, I've got a 529 plan for my daughter Megan, and there's $10,000 and I put it underneath her, it may have affected her financial aid eligibility by $2,000, where if it's under me, it may have affected her eligibility by $560. So make sure you know which ones have to go on there and who they are listed under. So custodial accounts are under the kids. Education-based accounts are under parents, not the kids. Retirement accounts do not go on there. As Joelle mentioned, the balance of your 401k plan, your 403b, your Roth IRA, those are not going to appear on this application anywhere. If I have $100,000 in my 401k plan, and I just saw investment stocks, bonds, and mutual funds and stuck it on there, that may have affected our financial aid eligibility by $5,600. And again, when I hit submit, no one's going to know that I put the wrong asset on there. Okay, so make sure you know. If you're not sure, call. Your home's exempt. As Joanne mentioned, any other real estate is included, and they're looking at equity. So like if I've got a cottage up on Houghton Lake that I paid $100,000 for, but I owe $50,000 on it still yet, the $50,000 of equity is what's going on there, not the $100,000 value of that cabin. Okay? So the one time, again, legally and ethically, you want to look as bad on paper as possible. You're not going to the bank for a loan type of thing. So rental properties are included. Again, education accounts we talked about. And if you're self-employed, farmer filed Schedule F. Years ago, we had a client came in, it's referred out in the thumb, and they've got a farm, and they've got a large farm. I mean, it's worth, you know, probably $2-3 million, but somehow on paper, they never seem to make any money. So for years, they never filed FAFSA, thinking we're not eligible because we've got all this real estate. When they figured out that they don't have to include it, they had a couple of years where their students actually picked up Pell Grants. So again, if you farm, you want to know whether or not it has to be included. If you file Schedule F, it's not. This we talked about. These you guys have in your handouts. Again, as far as scholarships, look here locally first, local foundations, your employer, your church, bank, credit union, any service groups that you belong to. Foundations or like ours look at the schools. The schools will automatically consider your son or daughter for scholarship money when they get their transcripts, but they may not consider them for every private donor scholarship. So I don't know if you guys have any private donor on your website, but typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of the schools will consider them for their scholarships based on SAT scores and GPA. But if a business like ours wants to go to a school like Saginaw Valley and say, okay, anyone locally looking to pursue financial services, we'll give away 50 grand a year, they may put our information on their website, but their admissions financial aid office isn't going to spend any time trying to match them up. So make sure the kids are on their websites looking through that. Look locally. Do not pay for a scholarship search. And I would look at, and you got some resources in there, FastWeb, CareerInfoNet. There are some good free, safe sites. The kids should not spend a penny to look for any scholarship searches. Tax credits, this is what the last slide I have, promise. Just high level, again, I'm not the accountant or CPA, but if you do your own taxes, you want to be aware of what these are. If you have a tax preparer, make sure you remind them when you guys have kids in school. American Opportunity Credit, that's up to $2,500 per year. So if your son or daughters are going off to school, dollar for dollar, it's a tax credit. So the first $2,000 that was paid for tuition, even if it was in loans, there are income limits associated with these. 80,000 single, 160 married filing jointly. If we're that or less, dollar for dollar, you get the first $2,000 back. 25% on the second $2,000. So if you spent $4,000 in tuition and your income's within those limits, you're getting a $2,500 tax credit back. That's per child. So if you got 3 kids in school, you could potentially have 3 American Opportunity credits for up to 4 years. Okay. Lifetime learning credit, that's up to 20% paid in tuition. So if you got a student that's got done with undergrad and they went off to grad school or something and you shelled out now 10 grand in tuition, again, mom and dad can still go claim a $2,000 tax credit. It's 20% up to $2,000. That's 1 per tax return. So if you have 3 kids in grad school, you only get 1 of those. Student loan interest may be deductible. Distributions from education-based accounts, if you have a covered LIRA 529 plan, if you've not looked at, and this isn't to be an investment seminar at all, but if you have monies that are in savings that you're looking to use for school, one of the plans I'd have you guys go look at is called the Michigan Education Savings Plan, or the MESP. So this isn't about taking on risk, but there may be tax deductions. So if I've got a client in my office and let's say they've got $10,000 in checking or savings or CDs that they plan to use next year for college, just for putting money into those plans, there's a state income tax deduction up to 4.25%. So if I put 10 grand in, it's going to save me $425 just in the form of a tax deduction. And then any interest earned comes out tax-free, provided it's used for a qualified expense. And I wouldn't take on any risk. Again, if I've got $1 today saved for my son or daughter that's a junior, senior, I want to make sure it's worth at least that. There's some options there that pay almost 2% in a guaranteed fixed account. So things to look at. There may be some tax benefits to using some of those types of accounts. Things that I want to look at, again, what's my family contribution going to be? All the schools will have on their websites, if you go to the financial aid office, you can go home tonight and jump online, they'll have what's called a net price calculator. So you can go begin to enter in some of your information. It'll give you kind of a shortened version, give you a ballpark idea what your financial aid package may look like at that school. Okay? So look to figure out what your family contribution is going to be. You don't have to wait till your son or daughter is a senior to figure this out. You can start looking at this if you have a freshman, sophomore, junior. If your income and assets you think are going to be comparable over the years, you can get an idea what this number is going to be today. Look at schools that will give you the best financial aid package. Make sure you get your financial aid applications filled out as soon as possible. Again, I would encourage everyone the month of October. So, and then you're going to have to continue doing this year over year. The second year, it's much easier. So kids graduating this year, the first time it's kind of labor intensive. The following year, you can do what's called a FAFSA renewal. It's going to pre-populate like 90% of your information. So you want to continue to do that every October. They don't have to be done that month, but I would encourage everyone the month of October to get those done. And then looking for us as parents, if I'm going to shell out money for school, are there ways we can do it kind of on a tax favor basis? Glazed over even more. So, questions? I know it's a lot to take in, but.
What was the name of that website you said?
It's misaves.com. Good, and if you got advisors, talk to them about it. Like I said, don't, but it's a good plan to use. If it's monies that you're going to use for school, there's no fees to set up the accounts, there's no commissions with the funds, there's different options that you can use, but, and it doesn't matter where your son or daughter goes to school. Lots of times I'll see folks not use them because they say, gosh, my son or daughter's going to school in, you know, Minnesota or Hawaii or wherever they want to go off to school. If you're in the state of Michigan and you're funding it, they're not restricted to a state of Michigan school. They get, there's another, it's called a Michigan Education Trust, a prepaid tuition, that's state specific, but the MESP is a 529 plan. And yeah, there's tax benefits, and they got some fairly competitive fixed returns. Right now, I think they pay 1.85% in their most conservative account, and they reset that annually. So, yes.
Should most financial advisors, I mean, if you've got different assets in different places, should your financial advisor know what goes on here and what doesn't? I mean, as far as like what should be included, what shouldn't, or how did you figure that out?
That's a great question. We figured, not because we wanted to, trust me, I didn't ever want to know what an EFC was or a FAFSA. This started in our office probably 20 years ago, long story short. Wayne Meyer, our founder, I mean, he had a meeting with some clients, and he came out of the meeting, and his face was all red one day, and he paged me and my partner Mike in his office and said, hey, we got to have a talk. And I said, okay, why, what's up? He said, I just came out of a meeting with some really good clients, doing a retirement review. Everything looks great for retirement. Then they said, okay, but what do we do about the boys who are getting ready to go off to school? They had 2 boys heading off to Michigan a year apart. And he said, I just kind of sat there, and the retirement illustrations looked great, but there wasn't enough there to cover school. And so I said, probably 20 years ago, he said, I need one of you two to figure this stuff out. And I was the one dumb enough way back then to jump into this arena. So when I went to school, I can tell you, myself and my family, we probably did absolutely everything wrong when it came to FAFSA financial aid and paying for school. So we kind of dug into it, you know, because that's kind of an important part of financial planning. I mean, for a lot of our clients getting ready to retire, I mean, they're usually within that 10-year window, and now we're at the biggest financial hurdle of our life with kids going off to school. So it's something I think that should get looked at. In some cases, not all, and don't go home and move anything based on anything I've talked about. Like I said, there are times where there may be ways to legally and ethically get somebody in a better position for financial aid. It's kind of like tax planning. You can fill out your tax return, and you're going to owe, you know, $8 grand to the feds. And well, then a CPA may say, well, gosh, if you go make an IRA contribution, we can reduce your taxable income. And so, no different. There may be things, not always, that can be done to get, you know, a family or student in a better position. But as a general rule, not every dollar we have as parents is going to be penalized. I mean, you can have roughly the first 20 grand that we have is not going to be affected at all. Anything over that is going to fall victim to those formulas. How many advisors know which accounts go where? It just depends on how much time they spend in that arena. I mean, I can tell you 20 years ago we didn't know. So, and stuff changes constantly. So, yes?
On your financial aid website at MLC, does it list the recommended home worker wage table?
You know, we don't have it on ours. I think it might be on the actual Wells.net website, but I don't know where it's actually published.
Okay, and then do you give a recommendation that for a called worker in year 1, that your student loan payment not be more than X percent? I know that.
I don't do percentage, but that's kind of why we say based on this amount, because you can't really afford to pay more than this per month.
Okay.
So we don't look at the percentage necessarily, but I think that's where that number is based on that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Look, questions? Yes?
Can you clarify on the very beginning when you were talking about the user ID and the password of the FSA? So you set one up under the student and you set one up under the parent. So, and this is completely different than when I went to school years ago. So
Yep.
it's all a learning curve. But so which one are you using to sign on as to do all of the applications, hers or mine? And if I go on as me, do I get to see her? And if she goes on as hers, she gets to see anything that I put in? I guess that's, how does that all function together?
Yep.
The student should really be the one logging in with their FSA ID. You can't log in, and that's a great question because that causes problems. If initially you would try to log in with the parent information, it's always going to say you, but you is the student, not the parent. But now they've made it a little bit more clear, because if you try to say I am the parent, it won't have you put your FSA ID right away. It will have you put your student's name, social, date of birth, and then it will go in, and then you can fill stuff in, and then to sign it, you put your FSA ID, which is a switch because it didn't used to do that.
So, but as far as from my standpoint, when I use mine, if I set one up for me, then it's just going to show information. It's really not going to be, I mean, what is the benefit of it? Do we even actually have to have one?
Yes, to sign off on it as the parent, you have to have one.
Okay.
Everybody in the back here, talk about the FSA, could you hear it back there, Andrew, or no?
Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was about the FSA ID and who has to have it and whether the parent and student, and if a parent signs on versus the student. Like I'm going to use myself as an example. I've got 2 kids in school now. So I've got one FSA ID for myself or my wife. We both don't have to have one. What the purpose of that's going to be for me to go on and sign off attesting that the information we're submitting on that application is correct, okay? My son has to have one for his FAFSA. My daughter has to have one for hers. So if she's logged on doing her FAFSA, or if I'm logged on helping her, we're doing that application. When it gets to the end, she's going to have to sign that, as would I. And it's going to ask me for my FSA ID for me to electronically apply that signature. And then it would be the same. And so like if I've got 1 child in school, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids in school, I only need one FSA ID for myself, and I'll continue to use it year over year, but each child's going to have one of their own, and as parents, we're going to be using it to sign as long as they're what's called a dependent student. Once the kids are 24 years of age, they're qualifying events that make them independent. Once they become independent, that means our information as parents doesn't come into play. Go ahead.
The student signs in under their name.
Yep.
That's how they want to fill it out. When you put in your signature, does that pull in all that information, or are you still filling that out on the application again?
So the first time we file the application, the question was when we sign on, is it pulling information in? If we've got a freshman going off to school next year, so we're going to fill this out in October, right? You've never filed one before, you're going to have to go key in all of your manual data. Your son or daughter is going to enter their information, name, address, social security number, their information, parental information. Joe Ellen talked about it's going to ask for 2017 income information. There's going to be option to link to the IRS. You want to do that because that's going to basically pull and retrieve all of your numbers over when you go do that. When you do that and when you do link to the IRS, make sure you have your tax return with you. So it's going to pull over some of your information out, but not all. It's going to pull over your adjusted gross income. It's going to pull over your income tax paid. But then it's going to say, okay, what was mom's wages? What was dad's wages? It's not going to pull that. So you're going to want your W-2s there in front of you to pull that up and plug that in. Okay? The following year, you're going to be able to go do a renewal FAFSA. It's going to pre-populate everything, so you're not going to re-enter your name, address. I mean, you can update it if you've moved, changed email addresses. Then you're just going to update your bank balances, savings, re-pull the tax returns. And the reason you want to use the FSA ID, a lot of the students will be flagged for verification. So that's like a little mini financial aid audit, if you would. And they're going to want tax transcripts. They don't want your tax returns. Years ago, you could send them your tax returns. They won't take them today. They want, if you file and use the IRS data retrieval tool, that will electronically submit it to the school.
And I just want to clarify, I don't, if your question was, when the student logs in, they will do the information. So ideally, you're working with the student and you're logging in together and working on it together. So when the student's logged in, they'll still have they'll be filling in the parent information as themselves, but they'll have to put in the parent information. And then they will sign off on it, you will sign off on it. So if you try to log in as the parent, there's a way to do that, but not through the student FSA ID or yours. If you're trying to log in as the parent, it will say, they just changed the website, so you can't really mess that section up, but you would just put in the student's name, social, date of birth, and then it will pull up the screen. You can enter all the information, and then they can sign it. Either way you can get in, but and it will store that information until the next time you have to access it. So like if you have a question, you can save it, log out, you can go back in, that information's in there, and then you can sign and submit it. So hopefully that clarifies.
So can you start putting information in prior to the October 1st and it's saved?
You can't access it before October 1st at all.
So once October 1st comes, then you can do your sign-ons and create those accounts, but whatever you put in there is saved and you can go back.
Correct.
And add stuff to it as you progress through it.
Right.
And you can create your FSA ID today. So So you can.
You can do that part now.
That's a little time consuming as well, so I mean that's a good thing to get knocked out, have the students do them and the parents get that set up so you're kind of ready to go. The window and the paper version won't come live till October 1st, so if you log on there now, you can go fill out a FAFSA, but it's going to be for this current year. So the 1920 will not open until October 1st. Technically it'll be a drop down to say what year you're filing for. 1920 will not open until October 1st.
But you can get your username and password set up now.
Yes, you can. Yeah, and if you make a mistake, I mean, once you've submitted it, I've had several times where I've had families come in and you'll get an email after you submit the application. It'll say your SAR report's ready. What's a SAR report? It's the student aid report. It's the one-page condensed version of the 10 pages of data you submitted. It'll tell you what your expected family contribution is on there. It will tell you what all of your numbers on. I've had families come in and give me that, and I'll look through that and start asking questions, and they'll say, gosh, here's this $482,000. What's that number? Well, that's my 401k balance. Okay, well, that didn't belong on there. Okay, if that happens, you can go back in and make an update or correction. So once it's filed, you won't be able to access it right away for probably 48 to 72 hours while it's being processed. But if you do need to make a correction or something, you can log back in and do that. The financial aid office will be notified of that. Joellen talked a little bit about special circumstances. In our office here locally, we got lots of folks who work for Dow or what have you. So maybe they were working in 2017, but maybe they've been tapped on the shoulder here in the last 6 months and said, you're done. You know, so if there's been a divorce, retirement, any major change, make sure you communicate that to the financial aid office. Those aren't changes that you can go on and make. Step one's to contact the financial aid office, and every office or every school will have their own special circumstances process. Some will actually have a form. Some will say, send us an email or letter explaining your circumstances, and we'll come back and tell you what we need. When your kids apply to school and you've submitted FAFSA, make sure they're checking their emails daily. They're not going to contact us as parents and say, Johnny or Susie didn't. We requested this verification form 3 times of them and they didn't get it back into us. They're not going to call us. Legally, they can't. There's a law out there referred to as FERPA, that the minute these kids are on campus, if we're calling and even if we're the ones paying the bill, they're not going to talk to us about their billing. They're not going to talk to us about academics and grades. They can't legally, unless your son or daughter signed off and given them permission. They may assign you a PIN number. That's a good thing to do as well. So if you do have questions and you're at home trying to help out with something and your son or daughter calls and says, hey, I don't know what the deal is, my financial aid's messed up, or there's a bill that's due, we as parents are going to get no place unless you've made those arrangements with the financial aid office. I don't know what the process is there at your school, but most schools have a process where my kids were at school where we'd get assigned a PIN number. The student would sign off saying, yep, that's okay. And if they don't, I say, okay, if you don't, I'm going to cut you off. So very quickly, the kids will sign off granting permission for you to talk to the financial aid office. But because things are going to happen. I had a student years ago, again, I could give you guys story after story. One of the few kids I had, this was many years ago, I had a full ride to Michigan. You don't see that many full rides to Michigan. In his first year, he made money going to school. Second year, and we helped mom and dad, our clients, and helped them through the whole FAFSA process. And long story short, Dad called me in a panic one day and said, okay, you know, my son lost all of his financial aid and I need to come see you today. I said, okay, I mean, we'll get it figured out, not a problem. You know, come on in, or we schedule a phone conference or something. Call the financial aid office. Long story short, they will have deadlines where they're going to process everyone that they've received everything in good order. All the students that have applied, they're going to do their packaging and award them. For students who had missing information, waiting on tax transcripts, verification forms, if it wasn't in by a certain date, they got pushed off. In his case, he was flagged for verification. They had, and when we called with son and dad on the line, they said, well, we contacted your son, and they cited on this date, this date, this date, and this date, and they sent a letter. What Dad got was a letter at home that said his financial aid had been removed. That was true, just because his son wasn't checking email to tell Mom and Dad, hey, I need an additional requirement. The financial aid office, it wasn't a big deal to fill out. It's a 2-page form. Mom and Dad sign it, son signs it, went back in with tax transcripts, would have been all set. He ended up getting most of his financial aid back, but he lost $1,500 as a result of not checking email. So make sure the kids are checking on a pretty regular basis. If the schools are going to need something, they're not going to call us as parents.
One last one is setting up their ID to students. Is that something we can do here on campus? Like they can do if we do it via?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll take care of that, parents. At our next class meeting, we'll set up their IDs. Okay.
If you guys have questions, I don't know who had handouts, you're more than welcome to contact our office. If you're on line 18 and it's October 10th and you say, gosh, I'm not sure what they want here, feel free to call our office. In our office, there's 18, myself, and then Eric, that handles the college planning stuff. But if you guys do have a question, feel free to call. More than happy to. If it's a general question we can answer for you, more than happy to.
I just want to make a point with that. Students, if you're going to be filling out your own FSA ID, make sure you know your social. If you mess up your number, it is a nightmare to fix. So just know your social when you're setting that up, because it is tied to that forever.
Thank you very much for taking the time to present to us.